Our special guest today, Gerry Meehan, former Marley, played 11 seasons in the NHL with 6 different teams, former general manager of the Buffalo Sabres, Joe Tilley's Great Canadian Sports Show. Coming up! Today's guest was born in Toronto, raised in Newmarket. He played at Neil McNeil Collegiate. He starred for the Toronto Marlboros. He was drafted by Toronto in the 4th round in 1963. He won the Memorial Cup twice. He played 11 NHL seasons with the Leafs, Flyers, Sabres, Canucks, Flames, and Capitals. He was captain of the Sabres and the Caps. He is a lawyer, college professor, former vice president and general manager of the Buffalo Sabres. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program, Gerry Meehan. Gerry, good to have you here, my friend.
Hi, Joe. Great to be here. Thanks a lot for the invitation.
Well, it's great that you're joining us from Florida, because you told me before we came on that a couple of weeks ago you were in Buffalo for that big snowstorm. And did you have to do some shoveling?
Well, I'm long past my shoveling days. We have a plow that comes to do the driveway. But we were fortunate enough to be in that section of the community that's a little north and east of the worst of it. So we had a typical Canadian Western New York snowstorm without all of the heavy amounts of pileup. We had about 3 feet over 3 days, but the city got anywhere from 6 to 8 feet, I heard, or down south of the city, rather. So we were pretty fortunate to have really no disruption in our lives. And Western New York handles this pretty well. They're used to it. They know exactly how to handle a snowstorm.
Yeah, I would think they would have to by now. What are you going to do about it? But I look at the window here in Scarborough, and there's not a flake on the ground. There hasn't been much.
Yeah, I was wondering
about crazy.
That. It's above the lake. Exactly.
Yeah. I want to go back to your early career, and you won the Memorial Cup with the Marlboros twice. Of course, you're much more of a factor in 1967, second time around. Number 7 in the video we have coming up here. That year, you had 26 goals and 42 assists in just 48 games. And in the playoffs, you had a hat trick in 1 game and 2 goals in the series clincher. Tell us about those Marlies teams. 4 points in a playoff game.
The Marley
CFTO Player of the Week.
The Marley experience was fantastic. And, the game has changed so much since then. Clubs were sponsored by the NHL clubs at the highest level. So you were part of a family of an organization from the age of 16 or 17. And that was my case. I went to St. Mike's as a high schooler, and St. Mike's was the Leafs connected, high school, and then on to Neil McNeil and back to St. Mike's when the Marlies got serious in my life. And for 3.5 to 4 years, I was part of that Marley culture. There was a great history, a lot of success. Marlies and St. Mike's historically were great, opponents, and obviously a local Toronto community rivalry. But it built. I think we were built and trained and developed to work within the team system that was connected to an NHL team, which always gave us the focus that there is an opportunity to get to the major leagues or the NHL through an organization rather than through a draft. Now, the draft changed all that, but we had, teams from 64 to 67 that had different personalities and players. I mean, Mike Walton, Peter Stemkowski, Ron Ellis, Paul Lorenzo went on to a successful career as a lawyer, but was a great player. Well, I could go on and on, obviously. Jim McKinney, all of these guys, Mike Bellick, were teammates of mine, both there and on the Leafs for a while, and then in the league playing against them. So there's always that Marley camaraderie that filtered through the entire NHL.
What do you think was the key to that Marley success? What made that franchise so good?
I think the Leafs, the anchor to the Leafs model, if not the exact way of playing, but the sense that there was somebody in the same building watching you play, even when you're 16 years old. gave you a sense that you were part of an outcome that you could reasonably expect to happen for you personally if you put in the work and you are capable at that level. So it constantly gave you the ability to move up or move into a more prominent role in the roster as time went by, always under the tutelage and the sponsorship of a major NHL team. And, often Punch Imlach would be sitting at the top of the Blues in the old Maple Leaf Gardens watching Marley practice at 4 p.m. The other thing that was really strong with the Marley culture at the time, much like the St. Mike's history as well, was education for anybody who wanted it was a big factor. I got 2 years of university under my belt while playing amateur hockey, which is unheard of these days, or not unheard of, but very rare. And anybody who wanted to stay in school or intended to be educated as well as play hockey could definitely be taken care of, tuition, books, and a stipend while you're playing for the team. So it was a terrific opportunity for everybody under the Marley umbrella.
What do you remember most about that 1967 Memorial Cup championship?
Remember the attempt by the Port Arthur Mars to kick the rear ends of the city guys. There was a bit of a culture war going on. We were the big bad Marlies from the city, and they were the Western Canada reps who, always had the sense that we got to show these Toronto people what it's all about. Fortunately for us, we had a very strong team at pretty much several levels, and we had enough skill and enough, if not aggression. I wouldn't say we're a dirty team, but we had enough toughness in the lineup to counter that. And I remember too, incidentally, that the Memorial Cup final that year had changed a little bit because the Western Hockey League at the time was a renegade league for a couple of years because of some disassociation or some difficulties with Hockey Canada, what it was called right at the time. And so they were not qualified for so a lot of the players who played for some of the Western Hockey League teams came to Port Arthur to play for that team as buttress for that team, because that team, as it stood in their league, was not probably up to competing with us. But they did a good job. I think it was 6 games, or maybe it was 5. But we were the better team, and we deserved to win. And it was a great experience.
See, you look at how, Toronto used to support a team like the Marlies, and today you can't get any support for hockey in Toronto outside of the Maple Leafs. Why do you think that is?
Well, I'll tell you this. I spent a year and a half of my life, maybe almost 2 years, when I moved back to Canada the first time, with the St. Michael's Majors returned to the Ontario Hockey League. And the biggest factor there for that team not to survive in Toronto was the lack of a facility, and I think the willingness of the institution to change a little bit its model to accommodate students in their institution, in the school that I graduated from, that were not traditional students. They were, hockey players who were going to school, not students who played hockey incidentally to that school opportunity. But it was a combination of things. But number one is it's hard to get people's attention for a junior hockey team in a city like Toronto with so much going on, not just sports. I mean, a hockey game on a Friday night and a Sunday afternoon is your opportunity probably to get a decent audience. And even then, there's all kinds of other things going on. And it really is a challenge, and it's been tried and not been successful. The team moved to Mississauga after I left. And it ultimately did not stay anywhere as the St. Michael's Majors. It came, I guess it went to St. Catharines or Niagara Falls, I'm not sure. But the problem really is the competition for the fan audience and the audience dollar. And the school body, because of the lack of the arena size, didn't get a chance to really dig in behind it and support it like in the old days when they played at Maple Leaf Gardens. If Maple Leaf Gardens had been, and that was one of the plans at the time for the Maple Leaf Garden plan was to preserve it as an ice rink and a hockey arena at some level, which I believe they did for Ryerson, Metropolitan now. But it was just it was just an impossible thing to get, but the financial outcomes you needed to support the expense of a major junior team without a serious subsidy that wasn't available at the time I was there.
Well, let's move on with your career. You got a chance as a pro. You had a stint in Toronto and then in Philly. Didn't have the numbers you had hoped for. We got some video of you with the Flyers taking the draw, wearing number 23 at the time, March of 1969. At that particular time, like as I mentioned, the numbers weren't there, but you eventually would get your chance. But tell me what was happening in Toronto and why you didn't have the early success that you hoped you would.
Well, probably two reasons. One is the opportunity to play in Toronto. I had come up there was some plan, I guess, to make me into a left winger at one time. At the time I was coming up, the Leafs had a real deep center slot, and I had played center all through my amateur years. And then I got to my last 2 years with the Marlies, I was on left wing, I guess, because they anticipated that would be a better opportunity for them to get me in the lineup. But my better position for sure was center. And when I came up to the Leafs, I was behind a crowd, but I wasn't. There's an interesting thing that young players have to understand, and I didn't understand it at the time, is that there's a whole different compete level at the NHL level than there is anywhere else in sports or hockey, including minor pro. Every league that leads up to the NHL has a different level of competitive intensity required to be successful. And most of us, when we grew up, and I was a pretty good offensive player, and the game really at the lower level at growing up was pretty much just like something you were either good at or not. It wasn't like you overworked, you trained into what you are today. And you came to the NHL your first chance with that mindset that you'll just play the way you played on the way up, and it's not enough. You have to put more effort into the game and more intensity into your game to be taken seriously at the NHL level. And that's what I tell most of the young people I talk to. You may be a really good junior or a really good college player, but you have no idea yet what the level of competitive expectation there is at the NHL level. And it took me a couple of years to figure that out.
So you didn't realize what it took to make it as a pro, but then when you get it back into minors, you did realize what it took. And then, of course, your opportunity came up again with the expansion draft and the Buffalo Sabres with a brand new team. Punch Imlach is a very happy man in his return to Maple Leaf Gardens. We have some video from that incident that night. And here it is. So Gerry Meehan with these Buffalo Sabres expansion team, 2 goals and 2 assists as the Sabres stun the blue and white. And if I can remember correctly, I think it was Stafford Smythe might have said something along the lines of, what do you think about the rivalry between the Leafs and Sabres? And I think Smythe replied, there's no rivalry because we're going to win all 8 games and we're going to trounce them. And here you go, destroying the Leafs. What was that like?
Well, it was much anticipated and a great reward. And, people at the time made a big fuss about revenge and getting back the team that let you go and things like that. That really wasn't the case at all. I just think that, we were highly motivated. One of the greatest problems the Maple Leafs had over the years in those days was every player that came back in the Maple Leaf Gardens to play a game was playing a home game, basically, in many cases, because so many of the players that were playing around the league from the Metro Toronto area and they grew up admiring and playing in Leaf organizations or against them. And it was a great outcome for, a return to the league. But as I mentioned before, I just wanted to illustrate that competitive aspect of things. When I was drafted by the Sabres in the expansion draft, I realized it was probably my last chance to make a career out of hockey. After having had, brief time with 2 NHL teams and 2 stints in the minors, it was time to, really find out how well it might go. And I really did train hard in the off season, something that players didn't really do that as often. And I guess I was more determined, more intensely committed to making my mark than I was the first time around as a 21-year-old.
So playing for Punch Imlach twice as a Leaf and then again as a Sabre, he obviously had his detractors. What did you take away from Punch Imlach?
A brilliant bench coach, a man who would do anything for his players if the players were committed to the Leafs and that the team and to him. Very, very good assessing the defensive capabilities of players and setting up a defensive model. He was well known for that kind of game. But most importantly, he let the players play their games. And interestingly enough, you can't change players into something you hope they'll be. You should find a spot or a role for them in your team that fits their capabilities. And with the Leafs, my best position essentially would have been a second line center, but playing behind Dave Keon, Norm Ullman, Mike Walton, and Bob Pulford would be a pretty difficult thing to expect to get that. So Punch understood how to deploy his talent in ways that maximize the outcomes for the team and for the player themselves. He never put players in a position they weren't capable of handling, or at least if he tried it, he realized that wasn't for them. So it was kind of the birth of the whole idea of top line, second line, checking line, and then penalty killers, as well as and always in front of a very strong goaltending group, which echoes the fact that Punch drafted, I think, Roger Crozier first in the expansion draft, first overall, which was obviously a statement about the power of goaltending with teams that will often get outplayed in the early stages.
But you know what? That Sabres team wasn't too bad. I mean, for an expansion franchise, and it wasn't too long before you guys were challenging. We got some more highlights from Gerry Meehan, 71-72 season. You're going to just stay on side here, right there at the line, and then you unleash that laser missile to beat your former team, the Flyers, another former team. How'd that feel?
Yeah. Well, that was a real surprise to everybody, including Doug Fidel, I guess. You can see there the shot goes kind of through and under, I guess it was Ed Van Impe. And so maybe he lost sight of it. But, it was one of those desperation things, no time left, shooting the puck at the net and see what happens. It wasn't like I picked a corner. It was trying to, blast it in the top corner past the goalie, which is get it on net and see what happens. And it went in. So I guess I was pretty surprised, but more surprising was the fact that I won the face-off following up that with an empty net, and I missed it for my 20th goal. So that was a bonus shot. But it was, people make a big thing of that also, and it was like revenge, and they got back at the Flyers. That's a media thing. We're just playing hockey, and although I did have to suffer a few bumps and bruises over the years playing against the Flyers as a bit of a payback, but that's the game, and that's sports, and that's kind of the way things go.
You weren't the only player who received a few bumps and bruises playing against the Flyers. That's for sure. It's amazing that you guys ended up playing the Flyers in the playoffs in a very short period of time. That was quite an amazing thing.
Yeah,
we got more action.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Finish that thought there, Gerry. That's good.
I was going to say, those years in Buffalo were really foundational years for me, and I think I was able to get established as, that kind of useful second, third line player who can produce offensively and play decently defensively, which makes you, an attractive component to teams that are looking to build.
Perfect for that situation. Okay, more highlights. This is from March of '73. You're going to find some room in the slot with a quick shot. And bingo, I think that's Ken Dryden you beat in that. That's pretty good.
Yeah. We are always, interestingly enough, because of the French Canadian component of our team, Joe Perreault and Richard Martin and others, always kind of like paired up nicely against Montreal. And I will say that I saw Ken Dryden recently at Dave's celebration of life. My old teammate Dave Dryden passed recently,
Right.
and Ken was telling me that how much they respected the Sabres because they were one of the few teams in the league that could skate with the Canadians. So I thought, well, that's great. Yeah, I would. We had great games against them, and it was a great rivalry. And largely, I think, because of that connection between the junior Canadians, that we had given us several players for the Sabres, and also the Sabres essentially were basically a skill team with the right components of toughness, but was a skill team. And I think that was the Montreal Canadiens model, obviously, and to great success.
Well, you and Ken had a lot in common. I mean, you're both lawyers, you both ran hockey clubs, and both came from the Toronto area. I mean, so it's there's a lot of connections there.
Yeah. We also played junior B hockey against each other. So it started that we were 15 or 16.
Right. Do you mentioned you saw him at the time at the celebration of life for Dave. Now, did you always get along with Ken?
With Dave or Ken?
Or with Ken and Dave, I guess. Yeah.
Well, I
Ken
guess, yeah. I mean, they were. One thing I remember about Dave very well, and it was much like among Ken in many ways. He, to me, was not a hockey player as much as he was a school principal, spending time as a hockey player for a while and then going back to his real world. He ended up being a terrific member of the community in Oakville, I guess, and he was I think an elementary, or was he a high school principal? I forget. But he was always that kind of guy, very thoughtful, very intense when he played. He was a little bit like that old 10th-time goaltender. You couldn't talk to Dave the day he was playing much. He wasn't. He was really focused, and he had a long career and a very useful player. And Ken obviously had a different path. He had finished with the first level of his education and went to law school later. But no, I guess it was when he was playing. But they're similar types. They're a very gracious gentleman, very intelligent, thoughtful. And really just an ideal person to be on your team as a leader and a mentor for younger players.
We have another highlight from Gerry Meehan. Here we go. From February of '74, Steve Atkinson muscles his way through the Bruins line, gets the puck to Gerry, beating Gilles Gilbert with the backhand. He had 31 goals, 29 assists in the 72-73 season. In all, you had 94 goals in 4 seasons with the expansion team. That's a heck of a run. What was really working for you there in Buffalo, aside from the fact you had a lot of skill and a skilled team?
Well, I think that it really goes to the fact that Punch knew how to deploy players. We had a team that had a line that everybody remembers well called the French Connection. And that was as close to a perfect hockey line as possible. And we had another line that was composed of 3 players, Don Luce, Craig Ramsey, and Larry Mickey at the time before Danny Gare turned pro, which was kind of a perfect, I even hesitate to call them a checking line, a defensively oriented line that could also score. I think they set records for shorthanded goals. So there was this slot left in the roster. In those days, I think we dressed 17 skaters, not 18. So 3 lines had defined roles. There was not a lot of mix and match. It was very much, the Perreault line went out there and dominated the offensive game. The Luce line went out there and dominated the defensive game. And my line with Jim Lawrence and myself and Steve or Huey Harris, whoever it was, were able to play, pretty much that really ideal second line, offensively capable, but also defensively responsible enough to be, and it's fair to say that the the Perot line, the French Connection, took a lot of pressure off the rest of the team because they were so good. The other team had to concentrate on them. So it gave us an opportunity to slot into an opportunity during those 3 or 4 years that really was a perfect combination of lines. And when I started my managerial career, I realized that this is the formula that works best for a pro hockey team.
Having that first incredible, I mean, I think about Edmonton, for example. You know, you've got Gretzky and Curry and whoever, and then you've got the Messier line. And I mean, you just, you've got enough offense on that second line. It's just scary stuff. Yeah.
You know, to have a second line that can score 100 goals a season, it's 90 to 100 goals. This is a pretty powerful thing. And I think that line between Jim and I and the 2 other guys, Steve and Dewey Harris, we scored about 100 goals that season. So, you know, that's a pretty solid support for the offensive line. And next thing you know, Don Luce is turning into a 25 to 30 goal scorer as well. So this is a pretty strong lineup. And, you know, I want to make a mention to what really turned that team into a contender beyond just a pretender. The addition of Tim Horton and Jim Schoenfeld as a defense player.
Right.
Tim Horton became the you know, kind of like the anchor for the entire team, both as a leader and as a player. You know, if there's a problem out there, Tim will take care of it. And of course, having this brash, young, hyper intense competitor on the blue line, but Jim Schoenfeld really did give the Sabres a look that was different than it had in the first 2 years.
What was the highlight for you as a Sabre?
Well, I guess making the playoffs the first time, Joe. I mean, that was really unheard of for an expansion team to be as successful as fast as we were. Our first year was pretty successful because we were, I guess, a pretty good team because we were really built around the top prospects of 12 other teams, which was really different than it is today in the 32 league. 31 team became 32 team league. So it wasn't a surprise that we were a capable team, but to have that kind of growth quickly was really unheard of. And to make the playoffs in the third year was really what validated and convinced the NHL and the local community that the NHL was here as a local community.
You ended up leaving Buffalo for stints in Vancouver, then Atlanta. What was it like to play in Atlanta back there? That was the only team in the deep south at the time. What was it like having an NHL franchise down there?
It was interesting because, first of all, our games were played on a Friday night, many of them, and you know that what happens in the South on Friday nights, it's
high school football.
And then on Saturday, it's college football. Then on Sunday, it's NFL football. So we were kind of like in the tough spot, creating the impact on the community that was. I think it was something that probably should have stuck it out. But, you know, the owners can't be expected to lose money forever despite their wealth. And it was inevitable that if there wasn't going to be a change in circumstances, either a new arena, the Omni was downtown, and nobody went downtown at that point for games. Not nobody, but the crowds were, in some cases, half capacity, and there was no other option for them but to move. But you know, and personally, my stint there was again a miscast guy on a team that didn't have the role available to me that I played best. So as a fourth line player, an occasional player, it became basically unattractive for sure for both sides.
And then off to Washington. And once again, you became a captain, and things seemed to click better for you when you returned to Washington. But we do have some highlights from a night that is probably a forgettable night in February of 1977. You're playing the Leafs, and one of your former teams, and Daryl Sittler's goal here makes it 9-0 at that point. I think 10-0 the final.
Oh yeah.
Do you remember that? Do you remember that night?
I don't know. Was that what year was that? Was I in that game?
That was 77. I'm not sure.
Oh,
You were
when I
number
went into
14.
the
There you
game,
are.
yeah.
There you are. Number 14. Yeah,
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it can't have been good. Well, there were times when, we were a pretty decent competitive team at times, but when the better teams put on their best show, it was tough to be in the mix. I remember we lost to Montreal by a similar score, but we got one goal, and that was my goal. So that was the ignominious goal. One goal in a 10 or 11 goal loss was pretty much antidotes for the feeling of what we're doing. But the Caps in those early days, frankly, the NHL gave them nothing to work with in the expansion draft. And, in those days, it was the expansion fee, I think, was $6 million for Washington. And for that, they basically got
Right.
the ability to operate and find a way to get decent. But it took 6-7 years before it turned around, and maybe a little longer. But I think I made a contribution to the organization's development and to some extent its success.
Well, interestingly enough, 2 weeks later, you guys beat the Leafs 4-2 back home in Washington. So there you go.
I remember that game. That one I remember. Yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah, I think you had a goal and an assist in that one. Yeah,
I did. Yeah, I remember that game now.
So we see, we see that night that we just saw the 10-0 loss. Borja Salming was a +5 that night.
Yeah.
Inge Hamstrom, I think, had 5 points. But what do you recall about Borja, who we just lost?
He was, the absolute pinnacle of class as a hockey player and as a gentleman, as I understand. I didn't know him personally, and even though I'm a member of the Leafs alumni, I never crossed his path. And I admired 2 or 3 things about him, not only his skill level and his stewardship and his command of the game when he was on the ice. Between him and Lanny and Daryl, they were what a perfect combination of forward and defense people on the ice. And, a guy that could take a lot of ice time, very, very alert guy, strong, very powerful on his skates. And he's historical because he's the guy that killed the myth that European players couldn't play in the NHL because they were not. And many people misunderstood that. Said, I had this conversation recently with somebody about, why is it that they didn't get the respect they deserved early on? I said, because they came from a type of game that required a high level of skill with not a lot of physical contact on the big ice of the European international game. It is a different game totally. So they were bringing that game to a smaller, more confined element and arena. And so it took them some time as a culture to figure that out. But the Swedes have been a tremendous addition to the National Hockey League and still are today. And the gratitude to the entire world and organization is owed to that gentleman and Inge too, because they did take the chance to come over and face the inevitable abuse that they would face and still played their game at a very high level. I couldn't be more proud to have played on the same ice with Borja. He was a great fellow.
Yeah, and you look at it today. I mean, it's such an international game, and Borja certainly paved the way for that. And of course, then Kent Nilsson and other guys came in too. But Lidstrom, and the list goes on and on and on and on. So now you mentioned that when you were in Toronto, you got a couple of years of university, and then you got a chance to finish off calling Buffalo home at Canisius College, and then of course then on the law school at Buffalo University. Not the usual route for a hockey player.
No, not really. Although it's interesting. I think about that back when I was in at the University of Toronto, and at least before I went to Leaf camp. I was expected to. I was going to go back to my 3rd year at university if I didn't get a pro contract offer. So I had committed to my family that I was going to finish my education no matter what, even if it had to wait a while. And I had plans to go to law school, and two or three guys that influenced me on that at the time were guys Brant Moore and Paul Laurent, who were teammates of mine on the Marlies. And they both thought about law school, and they went on and did that as well. So it was always in the back of my mind. So going back to that as a solution to the rest of my life was almost inevitable.
Then you got a chance to be the general manager of the Sabres, and you were an astute judge of talent, bringing in players like Pierre Turgeon, Alex McGillney, Dale Hawerchuk, Pat LaFontaine, Dominic Hasek, among others. What would you say, Gerry, was your best deal as the GM?
I would say that the immediate impact on the franchise would be the LaFontaine deal. The long-term impact would be Hasek, obviously. We had a young team that had not found its way, and there were many transactions required to kind of get it organized into some semblance of what we would call that coherence of a lineup. And we had a young star named Pierre Turgeon, and to help him, I brought in Dale Hawerchuk. And that was, I think, a very important move in the right direction. We had been a team that was making the playoffs, but not looking like it was going to go beyond that. And I thought it needed an infusion of more, not only more excitement, but more high-quality offensive talent to get to the next level. And shortly after we made the McGillney draft and then defection, the first training camp Alex attended, I realized that we didn't have a player on our team that could really play with him. At the first training camp scrimmage, I looked over to Don Luce and I said, we don't have anybody on this team that can skate with Alex. Pierre was a really great player, but he was more like Dale and very thoughtful, cerebral. He could control the play down low, but didn't give us the high-speed impact that I think McGillney brought and needed a partner with. And that led to the LaFontaine deal, which I think put us kind of over the top in the short term and got us to the point where we got through the first round for the first time in 92, 93, after about 5 or 6 years of going through decent seasons and then not reaching success in the playoffs after just participating. And that really did have a large impact on where we were going as a team, because at the time, we were in the process of building a new arena or getting the funding together for the new arena. And I felt sincerely, and the owners felt as well, that to have a team that didn't have a high-profile look to it and a competitive edge that was a little better than it had been, we all felt that would be an advantage in developing the momentum behind getting the funding for the new arena. So it really did work out very well in the short term. But I guess the long-term impact on the game and on the Sabres itself would be Dominic Hasek, which really was a terrific opportunity for us to bring in a well thought out but unproven international star.
Yeah, and that goal should never have counted.
Don't bring that up in Buffalo again.
I'm sure that's still a story.
The most yet. Right.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about getting Alex out of Russia, that process.
Well, it started with the 88 draft, and in those days there was a rule that said you couldn't draft 18 or 19-year-old players except in the first 3 rounds. And Alex was on our list, obviously, as probably, if not the best player in the draft, one of the top 3 or 4 or 5. But there was a reluctance in those days to draft European players who were either under long-term contract or playing in the old Russian media, the Soviet Union culture and political circumstances. And we had we had 2 picks in the 5th round that year, and I thought, and not a 4th, as I recall. So we had a chance. And I said to the staff, I said, well, who's the best player not drafted yet? And I had kind of planning in the back of my mind that we would draft him somewhere during the draft. but not use a first three, one of the first three picks, because that would have put us in a media bind and credibility bind for taking somebody who everybody thought would never come over and never be free to play. And we had a group session. We just said, well, he's the best player after the first three rounds. And I said, well, I said, we're going to take him. And so we drafted them in the fifth round, and, thought much about it. My thinking was really, I don't really care whether or not he's not going to be available for 2 or 3 years. I care that he's never going to be available. And my thought was that this was the time of the Soviet Union breakdown and disruption. And really, to me, it was inevitable that they were going to become available, not soon necessarily. So the defection came as a bit of a surprise in terms of its timing, but very welcome, because we were able to get a player in the absolute early stages of his prime capabilities. So the defection is, it's been done, a couple of depictions. There was a sports documentary done by Sportsnet, I guess 4 or 5 years ago, which I participated in, but that kind of tells the story. It was cloak and dagger stuff, staying in the shadows and back and forth from the American embassy to the vast reaches of Swedish wilderness to avoid detection while we waited for the process to unfold. People don't really know, but a defection of a player, a person of that caliber, who is not a refugee per se in the traditional sense of refugee or asylee, it's a very complicated process, and it had to all be pre-approved before we could even take him out of the country. So we had to stay basically out of harm's way by staying in remote hotels far away from the city, Stockholm, while the process came together back home with a number of people, including the local immigration authorities, the State Department, and I'm told even President Bush's desk was alerted to this and was on top of it as well. So it was a pretty harrowing and exciting time for all of us.
And well worth it in retrospect.
Well, absolutely. He turned our franchise around, much like Pat LaFontaine did. And, I got to give a shout out to a guy like Dale Howarchuk, who really became the kind of the veteran anchor, and the support for those two guys to allow them to do their thing. And we talked earlier about that. I never would ever consider Dale Howarchuk a second line player, because he was a first line player in our team as well, and played, the point on the power play to great success. But to have that depth, offensive depth in a team, really allows you to do a lot more creative offensive work and risky offensive work than you might otherwise have if you had more of a one offensive line with a lot of support guys behind them that didn't have high-level offensive skills.
Great team. It's a pity that as I said, that goal should have counted. Anyway, you retired from hockey, but you're still busy. A few years back, we have a video of you taking part in the 50th anniversary tribute to the 1967 Marlies team. Best junior team ever, in your opinion?
The 67 team probably was not the equal of the 64 team, but it had some elements of the same thing. But far more of the players on the 64 team went on to NHL careers. But interestingly, a lot of the guys that I played with on the 67 team went on to careers in pro sports, hockey, NHL, and also a lot of teachers and principals and solid citizens that came out of that. So it was a really high quality character team for sure.
Now you're a professor at your old alma mater, the University of Buffalo, and you're also still a practicing lawyer. Tell us about those gigs.
The University of Buffalo thing came along about 4 years ago when I was still living in Ontario, in Aurora, Ontario. And I got a call from one of the professors there, the sports law, and said, would you be interested in doing any, occasional work for us? And I did a couple of things with the law school, arbitration courses and a player representation course. And as just as that was kind of blossoming, guess what happened? Like everybody else in the world, COVID hit. So COVID kind of slowed that down, but we went from that to do an online program on hockey on analytics and how analytics and team management and legal principles kind of dovetail in the sports world, especially in hockey. So I've been doing that on an online program now since then. We're just finishing up our 4th program, which is generally available on a platform called Coursera, either for just for general interest and for people who want to understand the business side of that, legal side and business side, or for credit through the university's registration model. But on the law side, I just joined a boutique business firm focusing on entertainment and sports activities. In the last several years probably since about 2017, 18, I've been working with a lot of retired athletes, advising them on benefits they have after the career, and working on the education model. So the idea is the practice is meant to assist and aid former athletes coming out of their careers and planning everything from what do I do next with my life, do I get educated, do I get a job, do I get a skill? And also more as important, especially for players now reaching the golden years, as they used to say, in their 50s and 60s, retirement planning, pensions, Medicare, and so on, all of which are part of the plan for kind of a holistic approach to the athlete's life. So it's a kind of a counseling system for the whole of the retired athlete world, from basically the age you're out of the game until the time you decide to come to Naples, Florida, to enjoy the sun.
Yeah. No, do you work in conjunction with the NHLPA or the NHL Alumni Association?
We have not done a lot directly with them yet. My theory is always go to the people you want to influence when you've got a complete package ready to go. And in this case, I thought we want to finish the 4 courses, but we will definitely be getting in touch with them in the new year to talk about that.
Perfect. Okay. Listen, Gerry, I know you've been very gracious with your time here today, and it's been great to have you on. And I just want one last question. Do you follow tennis?
I used to play a lot of tennis until my hockey knees, rebelled on it. I watch it from time to time. Have you got something to recommend to me?
Well, I was just going to say, what do you think of Canada winning the Davis Cup title?
I'm amazing. Fantastic. I mean, I'm looking at this impact. It's interesting you say that, because the impact of Canadian athletes in the sports world generally has been remarkable, much like the Europeans have come into hockey aggressively. The Canadian soccer players, or football players and soccer players that are becoming world-class dominant athletes is really quite remarkable. And it just goes to show you the power of strong amateur sports organizations and development programs that get players ready for, their success in pro sports. And so congratulations to the Davis Cup team. I must admit I haven't followed it, but it's another great accomplishment for Canadian sports.
Gerry, I want to thank you for being on the show here today. It's been great having you on. Real pleasure. And thanks for doing this.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about this. And anytime I can help out on these things, I'd be happy to contribute.
All right. We may take you up on that. Thanks, buddy. All right.
Thanks, Joe. Good to talk to you again. And that was great. I've enjoyed your work all these years. Keep on trucking.
All right. Thanks, buddy. More sports when we come back.
Take care.
Thank you.
More Joe Tilley's Great Canadian Sports Show coming up after the break. Guests on Joe Tilley Sports receive a gift certificate from Classica Imports. top-of-the-line imported men's clothing. Check out the Classica Essential Collection now. Go to shopclassica.com. Addiction Rehab Toronto, Toronto's #1 alcohol and drug treatment center, saving lives, reuniting families. The only treatment center in the province to offer medical detox, treatment, sober living, and lifetime aftercare all in one place. Our unique and specialized programs are designed to equip our clients with the tools to successfully lead a life of dignity, respect, and purpose. Let us help save your life or your loved one's life. Call today for more information or to facilitate an intervention. 1-855-787-2424 or visit addictionrehabtoronto.ca. Joe Tilley Sports is brought to you by COSA, Central Ontario Standardbred Association, providing a united voice for harness horse people racing at Ontario tracks. Check out your benefits today at COSAonline.com and check out COSA TV on Facebook and YouTube for all the latest harness news and live action updates. Live racing year-round. Go to hpibet.com for all your wagering options. Become a member today, and your first bet is free. That's hpibet.com.
Do you know why that happened? You didn't fix your ball mark. The birds around here are very protective of the course, and when people don't take care of it, this is what happens. It's pretty simple. Just find your mark, fix it, and at least one other. Hey, look at the bright side. We're not up on the northern course. They've got bears and moose. Visit moregolf.ca today. You'll find everything a golfer could need, from balls, gloves, and clubs to custom fitting opportunities and training gear. Go to moregolf.ca and get $20 off your first purchase of $100 or more. Just enter the promo code JT Sports.
Am I ready?
Yep. Okay, my COSA Swiss pick of the week. Last time out, I went to the Century Mile at Nisku, Alberta for the Canadian Driver Championship. I said Doug McNair and Oriental Express would win it after a nice pocket trip early. McNair pulled out at the half, never looked back, cruising to victory. McNair with the early double. He had 4 wins on the night to easily claim the Canadian crown. Dave Kelly was a distant second. Congratulations, Doug McNair. This week, I'm heading back to Mohawk for Thursday night's 5th race. I like the number 5 horse, Don't Poke the Bear. Sylvain Filion drives for our good pal, Ken Middleton. I'll also take the 5, 6, 7 Exacta and Trifecta box. Mohawk is hosting 4 series this winter to be contested December through February. Pacing events for 3-year-olds and 3 and 4-year-olds. All events feature 2 preliminary legs and an added money final. For all the racing updates, visit COSA TV on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Go to hpibet.com for your wagering options.
This is the Excellent Sports Adventure, brought to you by Lycom.
Well, they weren't even expected to be in it. They were supposed to be in it, but as a top-ranked loser in Davis Cup qualifying, the Canadian side made the most of their second chance. They blasted their way through to the final, where they took care of business in impressive fashion. Denis Shapovalov and Felix Auger-Aliassime both won their matches in straight sets as Canada sweeps Australia 2-0. They win the Davis Cup for the first time in history. Canada rules the world in tennis. Who saw this coming a few years back? Well, they finally got a goal for the first time in history. The Canadian men's soccer team found the back of the net, a lovely goal for Alphonso Davies. Unfortunately, it was all Croatia after that. The Canadian side heads home from Qatar after opening round play. Croatia looks like a force to be reckoned with. But hey, it was fun. And they got there. Now, that F Croatia business, not smart, but not a factor. Well, they hit the road with their defense decimated by injuries, but it didn't slow the Maple Leafs down, not one little bit. Facing a pretty good Penguins team in Pittsburgh, Austin Matthews springs Mitch Marner to the forehand. Just 40 ticks in. Marner extends that point streak to 16 games. Michael Bunting fights his way into the pen zone from the backside, gets the puck to Matthews. Number 10 for the big guy. Then the Buds wrapped up the road trip in Detroit. Bunting over to Austin Matthews. AM34 wires home his 11th. Leafs put the power play to work. William Nylander over to Rasmus Sandin. His shot goes off John Tavares right to Willie. His 150th career goal. Mark Giordano gives to Mitch Marner. Double M buries it. Runs his point streak to 17 games. One off the club record. The Leafs win 4-2 to make it a 4-0 road trip. 10-1-3 for November. Okay. Well, the Raptors are finally getting healthy again, coming off a nice win over the Mavericks. Pascal Siakam back to the fold against a very talented Cleveland club. Spicy P feeling it. A little shake and bake. Siakam with 18 points, 11 boards. Scotty Barnes on the offensive glass out to OG Anunoby for a long three. OG with 20. Raps roll over the Cavs, 100-80. Well, Red Owl Boxing put on a heck of a show, didn't they? Box Fest at the Owl's Nest 2 featured a great 6-bout pro card. The last undisputed heavyweight champion, Lennox Lewis, was on hand for this one. I got an opportunity to do the blow-by-blow commentary along with two-time world champ Steve Molitor and Francis from the Weigh-In podcast. Lucas Prince Body improved to 13-0 with a unanimous decision over Diego Chavez of Mexico. This guy, I'm telling you, has all the tools. Methuselah Mahindas also kept his perfect record intact, as did Tristan Brooks. Great venue for boxing and a great night all around. Well, we lost one of the all-time greats this past week when Boreas Salming passed away after his battle with ALS. The man they call King was on this show just a year and a half ago, and he talked about coming to Toronto.
Nice. I mean, just to come to Canada to play there, it was like, there was such the first when we went over, me and Inge Hammerstrom came over in 73. That's just to see Toronto and meet some people and see how it was. That was amazing, and see the Maple Leaf Gardens. And I think that's sort of, when we came into Maple Leaf Gardens and saw that, and we sort of said, wow, we want to play here.
Today's environmental tip: keep your drinks in reusable containers. Instead of buying individually packaged drinks, consider buying a bulk container for your favorite beverage. And buy a reusable bottle. Not only will this help the environment, but it will also help you save money. Rycom, passionate people who turn complicated business problems into simplified technology solutions for public and private sector real estate, properties, portfolios, and enterprise customers. Optimize and future-proof smart buildings from the ground up. The latest in fault locating, base building network design, managed services, cybersecurity, data analytics. Our fault detection will support all smart strategies, define projected outcomes for capital planning, and reduce environmental impact. Rycom, smart protection solutions. At Rycom, we're building a path to a smart and environmentally friendly future. We want to thank all the folks who make this show possible. These are friends, trusted business associates, and all-around great people. We highly recommend them all. A reminder that the show is available on iTunes, Spotify, Breaker, Radio Public, Google Podcasts, and Pocket Casts, as well as the Spanglish Network, Zingo TV, and Buzz TV Live. We want to thank everybody for their support of Canadian and local sports. And really, you should check out our YouTube channel. Past shows are available, weekly sportscasts, all kinds of cool segments. Like and subscribe. It's free. Thanks once again to Gerry Meehan for being on the show. Thank you for watching. Join us next time when Ken Reagan drops by. We'll see you then. Joe Tilley's Great Canadian Sports Show is brought to you by Brian Gribben Insurance Planning. helping you solidify your financial future.
At BGIP, what we do that's unique in the marketplace is we show people how to spend and enjoy their money in their early years of retirement without the fear of running out. Also, we're able to do this without you having to change financial advisors. Please look us up at bgip.ca today. Let's book a 30-minute phone call to see how we can bring value to you and your family in your planning.
Call Brian today for all your retirement needs. We did. 905-686-5678. Do you want to buy or sell a home? Could 31 years of real estate experience help you? Why not speak to an amazing team that loves to overpromise and overdeliver? Aldo has a tremendous team of experts on staff. They are committed to making your next real estate transaction smooth and comfortable. Call 416-GET-ALDO or visit getaldo.com.
MNP, a leading Canadian national accounting, tax, and business accounting firm. MNP proudly serves and responds to the need of their clients in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors. Through partner-led engagements, MNP provides a collaborative, cost-effective approach to do business and personal strategies to help people and organizations to succeed across the country and around the world. With local offices in Oshawa, Mississauga, Burlington, and more, their team is here to support you. Visit mnp.ca today to learn more.